The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 14th chapter. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman who was bent over. Oh, sorry, there's a little typo there. Let me try again. And just then there appeared on one occasion when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they watched him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by the host. And the host who has invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated.
Now, usually I preach from the Bible texts that are assigned to each Sunday that are read before the sermon. Now, these come from something called the Revised Common Lectionary. You might have heard of it, you might not have. And pastors like me think the Revised Common Lectionary is pretty cool. We get excited about it. We geek out about it, you could say. But I'm not going to explain it here. It might get kind of boring. If you're interested, send me an email. I'll tell you all about it. Now, there are times when the Bible texts that are assigned on a Sunday are really, really exciting. Sometimes they jump off the page at you. Maybe Jesus is healing someone, or maybe St. Paul is talking about the love of God in Christ Jesus and how we can't be taken away from it. Or maybe in the Old Testament, at least, you've got some story about bloody mayhem and murder and craziness. And it might be disturbing, but at least it's interesting. Keeps your attention. Today does not seem to be one of those days. Today, in the first lesson, we got some good advice from Proverbs, and that's cool. And we hear some good advice from Jesus, too. And in Hebrews, we learn about a list of things that we shouldn't do and things that we should do. And that's fine and everything, but really, all right. Today's lessons are kind of like a 40-degree day. No one gets really excited about a 40-degree day, do they? You don't really talk about a 40-degree day. 50-degree day, put a smile on your face. 60 or 70-degree day, you're ready to have a barbecue pretty much. 20-degree day, it's freezing. At least you have something to talk about and complain about, right? 40-degree day, who really cares? Nobody's going to remember it. And it feels like we have a 40-degree day in our lessons today. Now, again, Proverbs says that you shouldn't put yourself forward in the king's presence. You should wait for the king to ask you. There's nothing worse than being demoted in public. Seems that Jesus is saying the same thing. Don't take a place of honor and then have your host demote you in public. That's not cool. And then he talks about how we should help people who can't help us because we'll receive a reward at the resurrection of the righteous. Hey, that's all good and all. Doesn't seem that earth-shattering. Not that special, does it? It's like we have a 40-degree day here. Nothing to get excited about, nothing to get worried about either. Pretty straightforward. Play it smart, do your homework, brush your teeth, keep your nose clean. Everything's going to be okay. Except, something else is going on here as well. Here's the thing. Society in Jesus' day was based on patronage, honor, and shame. And the honor you were given, or your family was given, was basically currency. It was extremely important. They didn't have credit scores back then. Your honor was your credit score, and it mattered. And they also believed in a community there was only so much honor to go around. So if you had honor, it meant the person next to you had a little less. There was only so much that you could fight over. Your honor and your importance, it determined where you sat, where you lived, what you were allowed to wear. There were actually laws that would say only certain people were allowed to wear purple. Otherwise, you were forbidden to wear purple. I wish plaid were forbidden to be worn, but what can you do? All right. Your honor, your reputation, it mattered. And meals in Jesus' day, banquets or luncheons, they were like important ceremonies, and everyone's role and their status was reinforced, and you had to play it right. You sat at a certain place, and you ate in a certain way, and you needed to belong at that party if you were going to be there. There was actually a Roman guy who lived back then, a guy named Pliny the Younger. First of all, Pliny, that's just a fun name, right? If you're looking for an old-fashioned name for your kids, consider Pliny. I'll give you $20 if you name your son Pliny. Really, all right? Pliny. All right. So Pliny wrote a letter about how he went to a banquet, and there were 3 different types of wine served. The really good wine went to the important guests. The middle-of-the-road wine went to the somewhat important guests. And then the worst wine went to the people who barely were allowed to be there. It was the same way with the food, too. And as a matter of fact, in Roman banquets at the time, if you were a less important guest, you might actually have to sit in a different room in the house to eat. Kind of like being relegated to the kids' table, I suppose. So, we could look back at 2,000 years ago in Jesus' day, and we could say, oh, how backward, how silly. We would never do anything like that today. We would never use honor and shame today. Well, here's the thing. Did you know that on an international diplomatic level, there have been times when summits and diplomatic talks between 2 countries have broken down because of the size of the flags on the meeting table? The display flags? Like if one flag was a little too tall and the other was a little too short, everything would fall apart. Or, in America today, if anyone here has agonized over the seating arrangements at a wedding reception, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about honor and shame. You want everybody to be seated in the right place and have it all work out. Now, I have never experienced this, but I have heard that there are certain restaurants and places like New York City where you have to be someone to get a seat at a table. Otherwise, you're never going to get a reservation. You just have to be like a celebrity. I haven't been to all of the eating establishments in Swanton, but I'm assuming that's probably not the case here. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't been to the right place yet. Anyway, this last week was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and the Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King Jr. giving his I Have a Dream speech. Now, the whole Civil Rights Movement was about challenging the social statuses of the day. And you could see, if you've seen documentaries about this, the reaction that could come to the Civil Rights Movement. If an African American woman sits in the wrong place in the bus, or when an African American man or woman sat at the wrong lunch counter, or used the wrong drinking fountain, could be arrested. The reaction was bad. 50 years ago. It's not that long ago, really. Not that long ago at all. But when it comes to honor and shame, maybe the best phenomenon we could look at, it's something most of us have experienced, the school cafeteria and lunchroom. Honor and shame. Now, I know it might depend on the type of school you went to or the type of person you are, but if it was anything like my high school, there were places you could sit and places you better not sit. There were things you could do and things you couldn't do. Try sitting at the wrong table with the wrong people, and you'll probably only do it once. People might give you the cold shoulder, or they might actually tell you to leave. I heard a story of somebody I went to high school with talk about how their group sat at the wrong table and were actually yelled at and told to go somewhere else. It can happen. And maybe there are even separate groups and tables in a cafeteria. You know, the jocks, the preps, the theater people, the stoners, the hoods, the honor roll people, the techies, all of that, you know, divided into cliques. Sometimes these groups can form almost unofficial alliances. You know, the techie computer kids and the honor roll kids might sit close to one another and interact, but otherwise you can't talk to anyone else. You know, in my schools where I went, usually you had the chance to play some basketball or football after you had wolfed down your food. And when it came to playing basketball, there were certain groups of kids who could go to certain hoops to play at. And if you basically didn't have a personal invitation, you couldn't play basketball there. That's how it worked. I even had a teacher friend of mine who told me about her elementary school where they had tables that could fit 12 kids at it, and there were 16 boys in this one lunch area. And like most of the boys, 14 of the boys, sat at a table for 12, and then like 18, the rest sat at the other table all by themselves. And when the principal actually asked some of the boys to move over, only like 2 or 3 did. And one of the boys at the other table saw that as his opportunity to scoot over to the big one again. Like, oh, I can move on up. This happens. It does. Honor and shame and patronage and privilege, all of that stuff is a human thing. It's something the world teaches us when we're really young, and it's hard to break at any age. That's what Jesus is seeing at this dinner party. The dinner party he's been invited to. Honor and shame and privilege, it's this gigantic machine. And Jesus is going to throw a wrench into the works. All of a sudden, this story about Jesus and the dinner party doesn't seem so bland anymore. I don't know if we're at a 90-degree day or a 20-degree day, but we're not at 40 anymore. There's something to talk about here. Now, Jesus does 2 different things. He tells the guests that they shouldn't jostle each other for position, and he says that those who humble themselves will be exalted, and vice versa. And he says to the host of the party that he should invite people who aren't going to be able to repay him. Inviting people to dinner, interacting with people, isn't about getting ahead. It's about something else. Jesus takes our honor, shame, get-ahead machine, and he throws a wrench into it. He says to us, today, you know that crazy life you're living? The one that says you need to get ahead of the people next to you? The one that says you need to tear down other people so that you can build yourself up? The life that says you wouldn't dream of sitting at someone else's lunch table or let someone else sit at yours? You know that crazy life that exhausts you and drives you crazy? Jesus says, let it go. Put it down. You don't need it. You have been given everything you need by God. By what Jesus says today, Jesus is giving us a new life, a chance to reorient ourselves. He says that when we give dinner parties, we don't invite people who can only return the favor. We don't care about favors and getting stuff back. Sounds strange, I know, when you think about it. Helping people who can't return the favor. Strange, but it's exactly what God has done for us. When God invites us to his table here, we are invited even when we can't give anything back. God has helped us, and we can help others. So Jesus is inviting us to a party. It's a party where you don't have to worry about getting ahead, making a good impression, or being accepted. You already are. The host of the party loves you. Amen.